My name is Michelle Cobb. I'm the Executive Director of the Podcast Academy. Welcome to this very special webinar. And we will be taking questions throughout the session. So if you have a question, please just pop it into the Q&A box. All right, I'm going to turn things over to our distinguished guest, Jordan here, who can tell us a little bit about herself and then take us through her presentation. Thanks for joining us. And remember, use the Q&A box, not the chat, to ask your questions. See you soon.
Thanks, Michelle, for that very warm welcome. You set me up for some success today. I'm Jordan Gaspore. I'm a New York City-based podcast producer and investigative journalist. I've been in journalism since I was 14, doing the freelancing thing to try to earn some money to buy Subway, to be frank with you. That is why I got into freelancing. But today I am here to talk about a project that I co-founded about 2 years ago called Local Switchboard NYC. And like Michelle said, if you have questions, to pose it throughout the presentation. I am also going to pose some questions in the spirit of collaboration, because that is what Local Switchboard is about. I will be posing some questions to the audience as well to get some feedback about Local Switchboard and about our process. So we're a women-led local audio collective covering the news from New York City's 5 boroughs. And my first question to pose to the audience is, I've had a lot of debate between using the term local and hyperlocal news. And some folks think that local is better, that hyperlocal was outdated buzzword. I still tend to err though on hyperlocal for what this project is about, as you will see throughout the presentation. But I'm curious to get the audience's opinion on local news versus hyperlocal news and branding your organization as such. So I have our website up here and I have some of our social accounts, and sad to say, we are not super active on social media yet, but we are 5 co-founders, as you will see, with full-time jobs. And that's also something that will come up throughout this presentation. So yeah, a little bit about us, a little bit more, that we wanted to report the news from our actual neighborhoods in New York City. So that's where this project really came from, was all 5 co-founders, who you'll see their photos in a bit. But we came together thinking that we are all from different neighborhoods in New York City, from different boroughs, and we just really weren't seeing our neighborhoods being covered by traditional media, so the New York Times, even WNYC, and wanted to help fill that gap. So these are our distinguished co-founders. And like I said, we come from all over the place. I'm from Texas originally. I moved here about 3 years ago to New York City. And we have people like Sarah Montague down below, who is a faculty member at the New School. And Sarah has been in the podcasting radio industry for many, many years. So has Heather Chin. Heather is now in Philadelphia, but is still helping us with Local Switchboard. And one of the things I really want to emphasize during this presentation is that Local Switchboard NYC, we are using this as a blueprint that other people can follow to create something similar in their neighborhood or in their city. So our next stop is hoping to make a Local Switchboard Philly version of Local Switchboard NYC. So also we have Betsy and we have Jessica, who co-founded Local Switchboard. So our team, to go over a little bit more, that besides being geographically different, ethnically different, our religions are different, and we didn't know each other prior to 2 years ago, and I'll go into that story in a little bit later, but we have a large pool of producers, more than 100 at the last count, that have expressed interest in working with us or who have worked with us in the past. And another question that I wanted to pose to the audience too is that because Local Switchboard NYC right now is a volunteer effort, we've really been struggling with having people work with us for free, that having come from a lot of unpaid internships and fellowships from my past, I have been just struggling with not being able to pay a physical monetary amount to the people who collaborate with us in our segments, specifically because it's majority women, which we also did not aim to have. We didn't aim for this project to be all women, and we didn't aim for our co-founders to be all women. That just has happened very organically. So what we've been thinking about and what we've done to grow our team and to grow this idea in lieu of monetary payment is we've been really focusing on training, journalism and audio production training. And I'll get into that a little bit more throughout the presentation. But our backstory, we met in August 2018 through a listserv that some of you may be aware of. It's called Laudio, or Lady Radio listserv. And I had been added 2 years ago, fresh in New York City, didn't have many friends here in New York City. And I saw that Jessica, one of our co-founders, posted an email saying, I really want to create a local news show. And I became really interested, thinking that I come from local journalism in Texas. This is the best way for me to know my neighborhood, and the best way for me to get to know New York City is by covering the news here. So I went to this meeting at WBAI, which is a community-led radio station in Brooklyn, long-standing radio station. And I went to this meeting, Jessica was there, and there were quite a few other women that showed up to the meeting, and I fell in love with the idea. And me and Jessica, and then later on, Heather and Betsy and Sarah came on board to create a 30-minute show for WBAI. So we collaborated with this community radio station, realizing that we are limited in our resources and we don't have any money. However, we really need equipment and we really need a space to meet to be able to produce this show. So we collaborated with WBAI for a number of months, and it was this 30-minute news show. The format for Local Switchboard NYC hasn't changed that much from our days at WBAI to our independent podcast of the same name today. But the relationship worked out really well for the time being, because it did allow us to bring people in, specifically those who had no audio production experience. We had computers there, we had Adobe Audition on those computers, and we're able to sit down and do hands-on training with the folks that wanted to collaborate with us. Like myself, that I come from an audio production background too, did a hybrid of print and radio. So I was able to help train some of our early folks in creating segments. So one of our rationales for doing local news coverage, we attended a really great workshop called News Foundry about 2 years ago when we went to Philly, and it was a 3-day-long workshop on building a journalism outlet, pretty much. So we had 3 days to really focus on our projects and why we want to do this, why we were here, why we were giving our time as volunteers to this project. And one of our rationales that came out of this workshop was, again, the idea that our neighborhoods were not being covered. These news deserts, or this idea of a news desert that began to surface a few years ago, that, it says in the PowerPoint about describing the erosion of local papers and local coverage. That was one reason why Local Switchboard NYC should exist. And also, and I have it in bold here, that, really local news reporting does reveal the morrow, and results, the features become sustained coverage and investigative work. You really get to build trust with your community and an understanding of your community and the audience that you serve. So those are 2 big points for why we exist, and things that we presented at this News Foundry conference. The other thing was, because it happened that women were the ones running the show, that, it is important to have a women's perspective. And this was a point of contention that we found throughout our time together the past 2 years, is people asking us why women's voices. When we're presenting, trying to get grant funding, or we're talking about the ideas, why women's voices? Why does this matter? Can you give us some rationale about why this matters? And one of our co-founders, Heather, today actually sent me a link to this Poynter article that talks about this, the Missing Perspectives of Women in News report. And I just thought it was really interesting that even 2 years later, people are still talking about how there's a lack of women journalists in newsrooms, and also a lack of women's voices on the air. So I really think that this still holds true for why Local Switchboard NYC is important, and why other shows like it are important. And so again, I'm hoping that I can provide a blueprint for folks out there to be able to take this and create their own local news show. So again, we're a pilot project, like I said, and we have reporters and producers coming on board to help us where they explore their own communities. And we have this sort of as beats. So I'm in Long Island City in Queens, New York, and Long Island City is my beat. This is mainly what I cover. I do go outside of Long Island City occasionally, but I try to focus on my own neighborhood specifically. And so it gives some reasoning behind why these beats are important here. And one of the things that I also wanted to bring to the audience is getting a perspective of why this may be important to them or why it may not be important to have local news reporters actually covering their own backyards. Because I know that it can be sort of tricky when you live in the neighborhood and you're really invested in your neighborhood. How can you sort of report on your neighborhood, you know, with no bias, have you? And we've talked about that a lot too, but I'm still I really do think the best kind of reporting comes from when you are steeped in it, and that you have a stake that's sort of greater than getting something published, that you have a stake in your neighborhood because that's where you live. So I'm gonna go to the next slide. So we've continued from WBAI, we've continued to be a podcast, an independent podcast, and this is still a relatively new idea. We're only on episode 3. We took about a year off to sort of decompress and really discuss how we see this project moving in the future and working on building grant funding and really understanding where we want to get funding from, because that's also been an important conversation of who would we want to get money from. Do we want to do traditional advertising with local businesses? Do we want to apply for grants? What do we want to do? Do we want to collaborate with someone again, someone like WBAI? So these are all conversations we've been having, but we've been focusing on grant funding, but we're still a half-hour news magazine, and we do combine hard news with more exploratory features. We've been really emphasizing the features aspect, especially because of the pandemic, that the people who've been involved with Local Switchboard seem to really love feature storytelling and are able to do this through Zoom and just through phone calls. Some of us have been going out and doing in-person reporting with our masks on, but we don't encourage that. But we've still been doing more feature-y story than hard news, knowing that, you know, places like the New York Times still do hard news better than we possibly could with our time constraints. All of us are full-time workers with other companies, and our other volunteers all work with other places as well. So this is a portion I'm going to play for you of our second episode, and we called it The Ghosts Get Furloughed. This was a Halloween related episode about the Halloween parade in the West Village that did not happen this year because of the pandemic. And the theme music that you'll hear is a collection of what the subway in New York City used to sound like before the pandemic. We've had this theme music since our beginning, and it was created by one of our producers that worked with us the first year we were around. So I will play a little bit of this.
This is Local Switchboard NYC, a women-led audio collective. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Jordan Gaspore. We're here to bring you news on a human scale. News that reminds us that big stories often start small. News that keeps us connected. Local Switchboard's Betsy Lakin has your local headlines.
Right, so that's just the intro from our episodes. And I think our intro is a good example, though, of our collaboration, because the intro music was created by one producer. Our tagline was created by Sarah. We have our script writer is a different person. All these different components that we have of Local Switchboard are different folks that we collaborate with. And I am the host, and I sound really tired in that episode. I have not listened back in a while in that episode. But yeah, I took on hosting duties. We typically have someone rotating to do headlines, and then we have 1 to 2 segments in the episode, and then we have a news from the neighborhoods portion of it. So I see that I think someone posed a question. I'm clicking on the Q&A box and it's not letting me open
Yes,
Q&A.
let me ask that
Hi.
for you.
Thank you.
Being that you're hyper local, it seems that it would be a perfect business model for crowdsourcing content and funding from crowdfunding or via platform like Patreon. So since it seems like you're akin to the NPR format.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have had a lot of discussions about crowdfunding as well. And our big reason why we have not done crowdfunding yet is really based on my experience working with other projects on crowdfunding and knowing how much time and energy goes into creating a successful crowdfunding campaign. And so actually, for full disclosure, that I am trying to take off and focus on working on a crowdfunding campaign for Local Switchboard. So it really is a matter of time for us. So I am definitely looking forward to creating that campaign. And I think that is the best way of getting and generating interest and generating some monetary funds to Local Switchboard. And also like really hoping to generate collaborators. Like I'm hoping to spread the word every time I talk about Local Switchboard that someone may be interested in collaborating with us, even if it's a one-off on some aspect of the show. And again, that as a training opportunity that we sort of bill ourselves as Local Switchboard, the podcast, is a tool for the hands-on training that we provide. So we found a lot of people coming from print or text-based reporting, having no audio production skills, but wanting to move into the podcasting space, come to us and ask to get trained on audio production. And they have no clips, they have no work samples for audio related stories. And sometimes, I mean, I find, even in my own experience, the bar can be set kind of high to be able to get into podcasting if you have no prior work samples. So Local Switchboard as the podcast, you have a segment on the show, you have a work sample that you can present to prospective employers. And one of the things that I guess has been a criticism that we've gotten from potential funders is because you are employing or because you are collaborating with people who don't have the skill set yet, they're not professional podcasters, they're not professional radio makers, that wouldn't the content not be that great? Like, why would I want to listen to your show if it's just a bunch of amateurs, for a lack of a better word? Why would I want to listen to that? And that to me has made me bristle almost as much as Why Women's Voices. And I don't see it as this is amateur content. I see this still as building skill set and that you can still get some really amazing work from folks who are passionate about the stories that they want to cover, even if they don't have that much audio production experience. And we really do work alongside folks and answer questions and do hands-on training, even through the pandemic, doing Zoom trainings with people who are interested, providing different materials, PDFs. I don't see it as amateur content at all. But that's just my spiel right there and things that I've heard in the past about the show.
One more comment was that after crowdfunding, then you can pivot to that ongoing listener supported.
Exactly. Yeah, no, for sure. And I know like during the pandemic, the reason why we have not been asking for any money or been trying to get money also is feeling a little uncomfortable about asking for money during this time. I mean, that's something I also wanted to bring up with the audience, if they had any ideas or their feelings on asking for money during a pandemic. That obviously Giving Tuesday was the other day, getting a lot of emails asking for money, and I don't know, I don't feel comfortable right now during the pandemic asking for money. So that's it's also been my concern. But we also, during that News Foundry workshop, we're really thinking about who our audience is. And the workshop really gave us some nice tools to be able to create what I'll show you what is our persona. And all of these terms were pretty new to us because we don't come from management or an audience engagement perspective, that we're, all the co-founders are producers and journalists and come from that reporting background. And so, thinking of who our audience was a little unique to us, but it made me sort of laugh that, okay, we come from a reporting background, but we've never really thought about our audience before. Like, that doesn't quite make sense either. But we did undertake some preliminary, very informal interviews in Philly during the workshop. And we've done some more informal interviews through Google Forms and just going out in our neighborhoods and asking people questions. Like, I'm friends with a bunch of baristas at coffee shops in Long Island City, and asking them to listen to parts of the show and asking them about what stories they would like to see covered, problems with local reporting. So I've been doing some very informal interviews around the neighborhood, and so have some of our other collaborators. But thinking about the audience, we also had to think through at the workshop, again, our initial assumptions that there's a need for local journalism in New York City, need for women's voices in radio, and there's a need for radio training. Also, one of the things that, besides the amateur content and why women's voices, another thing that we've heard that's been I guess, constructive feedback has been, why are you doing radio training? So like, why don't you just do the podcast, hire people that have experience, or collaborate with people that have podcasting experience, do the show, or scrap the show entirely and only focus on training people in audio production or journalism. So something similar to, say, like in Brooklyn, they have BRIC, which offers training to Brooklyn residents. They do video training, audio production training, all kinds of training. So why don't you just focus on training or focus on the podcast? Don't do both. So that's also, like I said, been some constructive feedback. And I disagree that there needs to be one or the other, or something siloed in that, because I really do see the flow from the training to creating a segment to having that segment air on a show, than having that show be your clip to get to a prospective employer, or to have something to showcase your work. So, I mean, another thing too is, remembering the days in journalism classrooms and wondering, I'm spending all this time creating an audio segment or creating a radio show, and it's not going to air anywhere except in the classroom during a presentation. Or it's going to be a lot more difficult for me to try to get this from the classroom to somewhere more professional to air. So the feeling of, I'm kind of wasting my time in a sense. I'm learning these skills, but there's not really much to show for it. And I see the Local Switchboard podcast as being something to show for the work that you've done along the way. So yeah, like, this is all just from our workshop, our very, very informal interviews and in-person interviews and responses to this online survey. So I'm just gonna, this is pretty old stuff for us, so just gonna scroll through. But some of these insights have held true to conversations I even had last week about branding it again for women by women, which we haven't done. It's just the idea of having women's voices, people questioning, are we a women-only organization, or are we branding this toward women because the host is a woman and our staff are women? So we've never officially branded it as that. People have also talked about how our logo does look feminine, whatever that may mean. I guess the color scheme, I'm not sure. I don't personally think it looks feminine or that it's a women's organization, but and not everyone has a positive view of local news, our local journalists in general. So taking all of that into consideration and sort of, trying to flip that on its head. But moving forward, these are things that we've been doing the whole year since this News Foundry workshop. And yeah, we've become an independent podcast that we have been doing a monthly show. And what we have to still figure out is the sustainable business model for this project. We still have interest in the show. We still have people collaborating with us, and we're still working with people. But again, it's volunteer, and we understand people's time commitments. And again, trying to figure out a way to provide something that is not a monetary benefit, really trying to provide free training in lieu of payment right now as we move toward that sustainable business model. So yeah, this is all information that we gathered through the workshop, those informal interviews, and the Google Forms about how much people would be willing to pay for local journalism. And this is something that we're in the process of updating right now. But we were actually surprised initially that people still would be willing to pay $3 to $5 for the product that we really thought the majority of people would just want free. I mean, you see 20% no money, but that 35%, $3 to $5 was still sort of a surprise to us. And so, yeah, I mean, our ultimate goal really, we want to empower our listeners to be more connected to their communities. And we really hope that Local Switchboard can do that by getting them on the ground, training them, and being able to have them report on their own communities and tell the stories that are important to them. So I talked about our persona, and the persona that we created, our ideal, I shouldn't say our ideal, who we imagined was the person listening to Local Switchboard NYC. Based on everything that I've talked about prior to this slide, we came up with Jessica. And I see there's a question.
There is, yes. People were asking if we will be sharing the deck with attendees by chance. We can absolutely do that. And there's a video recording of this that will be up on the site as well.
Yeah, that would be great. I definitely would want to share all of this information. Again, the spirit of collaboration. And if you have any questions to provide my contact information, and yeah, would like to collaborate or answer any questions you have. So persona, Jessica, and it's not because one of our co-founders is named Jessica. We actually looked to see too about just like the most common name, baby name for a certain period of time, and it was Jessica. But the characters that you see down below, that, you know, Daria and Lisa Simpson and Bob's Burgers, those are sort of like the conglomerate of what our audience looks like. So New Yorker, obviously, because we cover New York City. We just said they're in a domestic partnership, they're community oriented, and they're curious about what's happening in their neighborhood. So during that News Foundry workshop, we put this together, and I don't see this having changed at all since that time.
A couple more questions. What is your format? Is it reporter style or interview?
Yeah, it's sort of a hybrid of both. So certain episodes we have an interview format, depending on the segment and who's collaborating with us and time commitment that they have to collaborate with us. So interview style, or, you know, we do have more of we're not going to get into like a Radio Lab style show probably ever, but a little bit more experimental, a little bit different than interview style. It's just been a hybrid of everything really. I can say that the next episode that's going to be coming out next Friday, that the segment is an interview segment with you know, clips interspersed in there, something pretty low key. But the interview itself is with Bella Abzug, her daughter Liz Abzug, so you know, former politician Bella Abzug, House Representative. So it depends. Long story short.
And then do you do in-studio or on-site recording?
Yeah, so we've been doing some on-site recordings, even during the pandemic. Like I went to, because the Roosevelt Hotel in Manhattan is closing down. So I went and I did some in-person reporting, and I stayed at the hotel and did some stuff there for a future episode. But it's mainly been off-site reporting. So just Zoom has been the main way of doing it. And we walk through people on how to do a video interview, and, you know, the self-tape sync, walking them through how to record your side of the interview on your phone, how to be able to relay that information to your guest. We have a whole doc written up with step-by-step instructions so you can send your guest, and then obviously having that Zoom recording as a backup there. But, you know, talking through the importance of having both voices on separate tracks. So walking people through those steps. And I really do think that an interview style segment is the best way to get someone started in audio production, like reporting for audio, because it is, or it can be a low barrier to entry and easier to edit. So when teaching someone basic editing skills.
And finally, from this series of questions, is it long form or headline news?
Yeah, long form is really where we're aiming. Like next episode, we're actually getting rid of the headline segment. So as you listen to that little bit from our second episode, it was the host introduction going into another person talking through the headlines. We're just going to scrap the headlines altogether. We just realized that, you know, we're pulling headlines from other news outlets, and news is changing so quickly, and also other outlets can do those stories better. And if people want to read those or listen to other things, they can, but we're going to scrap the headlines and have more space for longer segments that are original content. So, yes. We also, during the workshop, came up with a set of values, and I'm not going to read all the values to you, but it was very helpful in walking through what our values are for local switchboard and why are we even doing this project. So, I mean, one of the things that we all agreed on right off the bat is that we want to tell stories that matter, and that we really want to celebrate our achievements, and especially in a project like this, when it is a volunteer-led project, that celebrating our achievements is important, and that defining what an achievement is to us was important. And I mean, it could be something as small as, just having one of our collaborators who had their first segment air ever, just saying thank you, or having a person, or biggest achievement, I should say, was having 2 different people. So last year we had our second person who collaborated with us, who had no audio production experience, came from a print background. Our second person got a full-time job as a producer of a radio show. So we had 2 people using, like I had described, and what our hope was, using the segments that they created with us to go and get a job and work full-time with someone in audio production. And sadly, when they moved and got the full-time job, they were no longer collaborating with us. So it's always a sad day, but I'm glad that those 2 people got full-time jobs and used the segments that they created with us to do so. So that was a big achievement that we celebrated, having that second person go and do that. But also too, so we have our values that we outlined, and then we wrote our mission statement. And it was important for us to write the mission statement, and it's up on our website, and really just outline what we're doing. So yeah, we want to foster the talent of our female contributors, and that's changed. So our mission statement right now, that we had going through that whole debate about being branded as women, by women, for women, is this a women-led thing? What do we want to do with the women thing? That we got rid of foster the talent of our contributors and dropped female from there. And then we have our purpose, and I've covered that before. And again, the hyperlocal versus local debate, that dropping the hyper and keeping the local issues and stories in New York. And so yeah, voices of people who have ties to those communities, that's still staying strong. And over the past 2 years, some of the insights that we've gained from our listeners, people sending us emails, and we were at WBAI calling in or emailing during that time, that what we could do to collaborate even further with our communities and to have more people come on board from other neighborhoods that are even less covered throughout New York City, that before the pandemic, that we had a few meetings throughout different neighborhoods where we invited different community members as a really low stakes, low bar conversation to have them come and talk about what stories they wanted covered, what the media was doing right in covering their neighborhood, what they were doing wrong, what sort of constructive feedback did they have for us about the show and the format, and how we were collaborating with their community. We really did ask to other local reporters, so people who I guess you would say are full-time professional local journalists in New York City, contacting them and asking them for their feedback as well, and seeing if there were ways that we could possibly collaborate together if they wanted to do a segment with us, if they were more print or text-based. But yeah, we had reporters share their story ideas, so reporters from local switchboard share their story ideas and their research questions to community members to get some feedback from them. So hey, I have a whole list of different story ideas that I think would be great for your community. I want to run it past different community members here and see what you have to say about it before I start working on that story. And yeah, this whole ask different people in your community to recommend 5 people that you should connect with has been really amazing, that we've gotten a lot of contributors through that. through just asking, like, there's a local politician in my neighborhood, and I saw him walking down the street while I was getting coffee the other day. And I just asked him, like, hey, he knows who I am. He knows I'm a local journalist. Who should I connect with? What stories aren't being told? What's going on? Had a brief chat, gave me a list of names. I contacted one out of the list of names that he gave me. So these are all some very basic things that have helped us, especially when you're crunched for time. Because like I said, I'll do another full-time million bajillion jobs here and there. But yeah, we also put into perspective sort of the risks and how we can minimize the risks of local switchboard. And the spending your own money at the bottom here has been a big one that we are really trying to curtail, trying to prevent people who work with us from spending their own money, thinking about ways that we can mitigate that. And one way has been, at least before the pandemic, is being able to do a gear swap. So if somebody does not have like a nice Zoom H6 recorder, they have their phone, but they really are wanting to learn how to use a Zoom H6. I've lent my Zoom H6 out to other people that we're collaborating with, taught them how to use it. They went and did a segment and brought it back. I don't have, for instance, like there's some gear that I'm missing and that I've swapped with other people too. So like a pistol grip, for instance, I didn't have at one point and I borrowed from someone part of the group. So a way to mitigate spending our own money, just having a gear swap. And I mean, there's a level of trust that you have to have with people, especially when you have some pretty expensive gear. But it's been helpful for us and we haven't had any problems thus far. It's sort of like a library checkout idea that I've implemented, just a form outlining what you're borrowing and having them sign it, very, very library university way of lending my equipment out. But these are some of the ways that we've marketed and promoted our podcast. We've been really bad, and I'll be frank, with any sort of newsletter. We had in our first year, we had a MailChimp newsletter, and that we were so bad at keeping up with a newsletter. And so something that we are wanting to do in the future is just to get better at being more regular about a newsletter, being consistent. That has not been our best quality. We have been very inconsistent. We've taken most of our content off of Twitter and Facebook, and we have been trying to aim directly driving traffic to our website through more organic emails. I mean, we've been sending out personal emails to all kinds of people for our different episodes and trying to target different groups, different communities that we think would be interested in each episode, instead of just throwing it out there on Twitter or Facebook and saying, hey, listen to our episode. Really just trying to be more strategic and looking at our own networks and who in our own networks would be interested in the content from each episode. So that's just some of the ways we've been marketing and promoting a show. And then again, we were really good our first year about doing call outs. And it was not necessarily call outs on social, but call outs through our newsletter. And again, going through our own networks and talking about the show. So really the call out, what questions do you have about New York City history? What questions do you have about your neighborhood? And getting some answers from that and incorporating them into our previous episodes. And involving the audience ahead of pitch rounds that we were really good about until the pandemic hit. And we're trying to get back up and running, being better at involving the audience ahead of pitch rounds. So just some other ideas for audience engagement that I think you can use as part of the blueprint. So we have a little bit more, but yeah, researching how our neighborhoods digest news. And like for me, that really is just talking to people in my neighborhood about where they get their news from. And because we are a podcast, I mean, folks that don't listen to podcasts, that's why we were getting into the newsletter game, was to reach those people and to be able to have some nice text-based articles in our newsletters that are based on our audio reporting. But again, we got really bad at keeping up with the newsletter. I saw there was a question, Michelle.
Yes.
Is it only audio, or do you include or plan to include video as well?
Yeah, it's only audio. We had wanted to include some video, But the problem is none of the co-founders, including myself, are very good at video. And we have had no one come to us that is good at video or has at least told us that they really were passionate about doing video. So it's just been a matter of we haven't incorporated video because we have not had that skill set. And we actually, to our disservice, we haven't tried to reach out to people who are videographers or who are good at video to collaborate with us. So it's something that we should be doing, make a more concerted effort to reach out to those folks. But it's also the point of, because it's still volunteer led, that what would a person who is good at video going to get from local switchboard, because there is no sort of like swap for hands-on training. So unless the person with video wanted to learn audio production, and then maybe the person that knows video could teach, there could be a swap there, a video audio production swap. That could be interesting. I'd be really interested in that. I'd be interested in learning more about video. So no, that's a great idea. And yeah, we would like to have some video component to it. So another thing to think about in 2021. Yeah, how we learn about our audience. I mean, really the last year has been just talking to people before the pandemic, learning a lot about each other's neighborhoods. That has just been the best way that we found learning about our neighborhoods and having them see who's actually covering their neighborhood, see them face to face. But yeah, we created this local resources guide that we share with all of our collaborators. That it's just a Google spreadsheet. We have different tabs based on the 5 boroughs, so 5 tabs, 1 for each borough, and it lists basic contact information. So like the police department, fire department, who are the politicians in the borough. It gives some historical tidbits about different neighborhoods in that borough, and we have people that we collaborate with add to that local resources guide. So it's something that we can just easily share with the next group of collaborators, and they can get a better idea of the stories that we've done for those neighborhoods or that borough, and what stories maybe we're looking forward to, so story ideas. It's just a wealth of information that, especially if you're new to the neighborhood, you've moved around, or you're new to New York City, you have that as sort of a Bible of sorts. And all that contact information for people makes it very easy if you need to make a quick phone call. So yeah, I mean, just continuing on this idea of audience engagement, and that putting the listener and your audience first. I mean, just being face to face again, that building that culture of transparency. I mean, we had hosted an online Q&A prior to the pandemic, but we had plans to host something live with the public, that we would go to different neighborhoods and have a live event at some of the coffee shops, but that has sort of been scrapped because of everything. But something we still hope to do in the future, have some live events with community members. I mean, that would be playing episodes of Local Switchboard, having like the live podcast experience, and being able to have a roundtable or a Q&A with our audience members. So we talked about measuring success and sort of, our little achievements to our big achievements, and that we have all of this. We're very much into writing things down and having documentation for everything, and keeping it in this shared Google Drive folder and our Dropbox folder. So we just like to keep documentation and really trying to parse through our successes, and really think about what success means to us. Because the last couple of months have it just sort of feels like we're rolling up a boulder on a hill. But yeah, some of the appearances, we've been in other places, been trying to get around to different parts of New York City and to different audiences, and really hopeful too that now that we have a co-founder that's in Philly, that Heather would be able to help start a Local Switchboard Philly there, and that we can have little chapters all across the US. I would really be into having a chapter in Austin, because Texas is where I'm from. And so I would love to hear if there's any more questions. I mean, this is the end of my presentation. I could always play you more of our episodes, but localswitchboard.nyc is our website. Love any sort of feedback on the website or the show itself. I think we have another question.
We do. So being that New York City is the Big Apple, with so many New Yorkers around the world, I'm thinking you could actually acquire listener-supported funding from around the country and the world because there's so many people out there.
Yeah, I would really, really like that. That would be great. I did actually, so an interview that we did that hasn't aired yet was with a woman who is from Jackson Heights originally, and her dad. The whole interview was around how her dad was a New York City cabbie and has been a New York City cabbie and limousine driver for decades. And so talking about what it was like to be the child of a New York City cabbie, she has these really great stories, but she's now living in Paris. And because of the pandemic, she hasn't been able to come back to New York. And she's like, I really miss New York. Like, New York is the best city in the world. So you're right. I mean, we've already talked to one person who is international now.
Well, we have to thank Rich Casanova for all these comments. And he
Thanks,
says we just have to send him 12% of the moolah. We have a comment from Cliff who says, this is so impressive and helpful. What's the first thing or what's the key area of focus you suggest for someone to looking to replicate this effort with a different audience or mission in mind?
Yeah, I think the key thing is who you are collaborating with. So finding that core team. So we have 5 co-founders, and obviously you don't need 5 people to build something like this. But I would not suggest building something like this alone, because even with 5 people, it's been hard. But I would say the people that you are collaborating with, that core team that is starting this project, so important in finding, I don't want to say the right people, but finding people who are also very passionate in the mission and in local news, and come from different areas, not necessarily geographically or even ethnically per se, or gender, but have different, they love local news, but have different facets in mind. So one thing that I think we needed early on that we did not have, and we still don't have, is someone who is business minded. So someone who comes from local news or has a passion for local news, but has a business focus or a finance focus. Someone who can really keep the team in line about funding and making money. And that is such an important part. I mean, we didn't realize until a year in, like, oh my God, money is so important. And not having money in this project, it could actually end. This is what? So yeah, making sure the business person, you have the business person, you have the management person, someone who's really good at scheduling. You have the person who's really into the creative, that having people from these different facets, because if everyone is all into it just to be able to create content, it gets to be a giant mess. So that's something that we've had to learn, is really delegating those tasks. And we really needed a business person from day one. So
that's great advice. Okay, we've got another comment. Cliff Schaff says he's a podcast business pro. Maybe he's that person. And
are you interested?
It seems like he is. I'm going to put his email in the chat box to you.
Yes, I will contact you.
Great. All right.
That's the beauty of something like Local Switchboard, and something when you collaborate.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right, let's see if there are any other questions. Sharing a similar model from Texas. I will put that in the chat box for everyone to see.
Where in Texas?
I think you have to click the link.
Oh, Mansfield.
Mansfield,
Okay, cool,
yeah.
Cool. I just clicked it. Can I go back? Yeah, I'm from Seguin originally, if you know where that is. Mansfield's not that far away. Okay, back. I just wanted to make sure that yeah.
Excellent.
Cool.
All right, are there any more questions? All right, Jordan, this was really great information. As I've said, we have recorded this, so anyone who wants to watch it, it should be up on our website early next week. And just a reminder to everybody out there that we are coming up on the submission deadline for the AMBIes, which are the Awards for Quality in Podcasting. That is December 15th. So if you have a personal podcast, a branded podcast, a community podcast, or whatever, we're looking to get everyone to submit their podcast, the episode that they feel proud of. We're hoping to get a diverse group of podcasts nominated. Thank you so much. And everybody have a fantastic holiday. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Michelle.
Bye, Jordan.
Bye.